scaling Agile. I suppose all of you know what waterfall is, right? All of you probably know what Agile is. Devops is a familiar word, but how many of you are actually familiar with scaled Agile? There's a few hands, yeah? So the idea behind scaled Agile is to take what the Agile methodologies did to software development and scale them up all the way to the enterprise level to reap the benefits that we get from the Agile ways. But I'll shortly first tell you about myself in a few words. So I've always been a techie. I've always been a geek. When I was 3 years old, I started playing around with our Amiga 500. Of course, loved it and got instantly hooked, never let it go, really. And when I got a bit older, it was obvious for me what I wanted to do with my life. So I started studying computer science, gamed a lot, started writing code, and pretty much in all of the things that I do in my life, I try to do things well. And that, of course, expanded into like IT side as well. And first of all, I wanted to do like pretty code, nice code, beautiful programs. But then at some point, I sort of like realized that that's not enough for me. That I want to take it like one step further. I want to influence more than just one program. I want to influence more than just a few functions that work beautifully and work magnificently, work efficiently. And that's why I kind of got interested in software quality and the processes and tools that govern software development. And I eventually ended up working at Eficode in 2015. I work in Kalle's team, so Kalle is my boss, and Jukka is my boss's boss. So if I if I mess up here, I don't only shoot myself in the foot, I shoot myself in both feet. At least I suppose that guarantees me like 2 weeks of sick leave or something. But not a raise, that's for sure. Well, anyway, loving all IT related stuff. Been doing web development when I was at school still, doing Ruby on Rails, Java, Python, all sorts of scripting, being totally into like making games, Unity, you name it. I've probably had something to do with it. Not a pro, but I've like hacked around here and there. And as time went on, I got into SAFe, so the Scaled Agile framework. It was a bit of an like accident because I ran over it or into it at one of my customers, but I kind of picked it up and started learning it myself, and now I've done multiple SAFe implementations on some pretty big enterprise customers like banking sector, teleoperator sector, things like that. So the point of the whole thing here, whole shebang, is moving from waterfall to agile, and from agile to scaled agile plus DevOps. And I definitely mean that it's scaled agile plus DevOps because it's pretty deeply built in there, in my opinion. So what are the common like enterprise problems when you're doing software? A lot of enterprises say that, yeah, we're agile, we're doing things in the agile way. And maybe that is true in some sense, so that you might have your like small teams, 10 people, 20 people, who are perhaps using Scrum or XP or some other. But the fact is that when they're developing software in a huge setting, which involves like hundreds of developers, maybe even thousands of developers, the kind of the top level is not agile. That's waterfall, usual. So what we have is like a lack of visibility here. So the enterprise cannot predict the future because their process is so chaotic. They can't see what's happening in 1 month, much less can they see what's happening in 6 months. This causes problems with the developers, with morale. People get frustrated. Lots of big enterprises often outsource work into, for example, the Baltics or India or wherever. And like following up on this work and monitoring is pretty hard, or perhaps even impossible. Furthermore, when you think about like the slow-moving enterprise aspect, it's impossible to adapt to changes. So you think about having this market opportunity, and your business starts churning out these objectives that they want you to reach. And by the time you're done with them, you've actually developed them and released them, this business opportunity has already vanished because you weren't like quick enough to adapt to the changes in the market. So where you should be getting the features to production in, say, like a few months, half a year. And if you do it like a waterfall style 2-year project, you're already too late. And what that leads to is you have actually taken money, you've poured it onto your developers, so you sunk costs, and you get nothing back. So this kind of slow style of approaching things it's not working, really. The other thing is a lack of a systematic approach. So it's not very clear for which tasks people should be working on in teams, right? Because there's this manager, and this other manager, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, and they all think that their thing is the most important in the world. And they all bring it to you, right? And which one are you supposed to work on? Well, of course, mine. Well, obviously. But the thing is that you've already, for example, put in 2 weeks, 3 weeks worth of development on something, and then you're told to press the brakes and switch on something else. That 3 weeks is money down the drain. If you're not getting it out, it's down the drain, which is pretty much here in the like long returns part. The value is never produced until the software is released. That's obvious. If you build a feature, until you release the feature to the public, you're not getting anything back for the investment you made. So that's what we want to do here. We want to like make the return of investment faster. We want to reduce the cost of holding, which means that when you have something done, which you could release, but you don't, you like hold on to it. That's like the cost of holding it. It's
like inventory management. So
yep.
You want to lessen your inventory.
Yeah, exactly.
Money is not stuck
exactly.
in half-finished goods.
Yeah, that's like a lean approach to it. But here, in the enterprise scale, your release intervals are so infrequent that you like end up having a really high cost of holding, and you end up wasting your opportunities, like we mentioned in the like adaptation impossibilities. And of course, the improper planning. So your priorities are always shifting. You have your half-done tasks, as I mentioned earlier. People are shifting what they're doing, and you have your sunk costs. And if you switch to another task, and the time like rides over it, and your 3 weeks of development are there, and you're never getting the return of investment for that one, because the market opportunity is already gone. So how people traditionally use Jira? Well, this is the most common case, that we have teams in different projects, all right? That's all fine and dandy, that's nice. They should have their own sandboxes where they do whatever they want to do. But this results in them having no visibility in the big picture of things. Teams don't see what's happening above them, and things don't see what's happening like at the same scale they're doing things in. So they don't know what other people are doing, and they don't know what they are working for. So that's bad. Dependencies, of course. If you don't see other people's work, but your work is pretty much assured to at some point be dependent to someone else's. So you can't like put these into the correct order unless you know what depends on what. You can't timetable those. Then we have this like second way of doing things, which is a lot rarer, but basically you have like a single project that is crammed. You have multiple teams in it, and you have like your higher level features, epics in there. Now, this is where you end up having like thousands of issues in the project, and it gets hard to, first of all, limit access if it's needed. It gets hard to like modify the configuration if it's needed. Sprint management, for example, gets really hard because people mess up their sprints. They use each other's sprints, and when they do that, they cannot start their own or close their own sprints. And that actually happens. So what might be the solution here? How could we make this system scale up? Well, Jira does not support this like multi-level scale straight off the box. However, we still need people in separate projects to actually make them like work in their own context, but still need to like reserve the visibility given to us in those cramped projects. So what we do is that we actually create separate projects, right? We connect them to each other. We have multiple ways of doing this. One of them is issue linking. We might use some plugins, for example, to share versions, share components between projects, and like make them automatically replicate to each other. That's a nice thing to have. You want to enable visibility here. So you can, for example, create groups here that would allow people in different teams, in different release trains, and I'm coming soon to what release trains and portfolios are. You could use those groups to give people like visibility into the whole development hierarchy, if you will. You want to have like a structured flow of tasks. So you want to be able to take those like business requirements. You want to be able to like evaluate them, validate them, break them down, because business people don't speak IT. IT people don't speak business that well. So what you want to do is you want to break them down layer by layer so that your big business targets become singular, granular technical tasks your developers can do. And this is what Scaled Agile Framework is providing us with. So basically what this does is scale the Agile methodology into the enterprise scale. We all know these sprint plannings, sprints, or do we? Does anyone know?
What scale do you want to take it? 2,000 people in one sprint planning?
Well, they're not in a sprint planning. There would be in multiple PI plannings in this case.
So, question actually, when do you think? What do you think? Where is the? When do you need to go scale agile, and when you don't? Do you not need to go scale agile?
Well, the baseline is that you pretty much would need to use a release train, like a higher level concept, when you have somewhere around 50 to 125 developers, or if you have many more. Yeah. Or well, they can be like working on different products, but the thing is, if they're like working in sort of the same scope, for example, product families. But yeah, like 50 to 125 people per like one release train, and then you would have your teams under it, which would be like somewhere like 20 people. So this framework basically promises you visibility, predictability, and adaptability, which I will show how it actually does that. So the teams work on this Scrum/XP, or whatever Agile methodology. Scrum is the most usual here. And these teams form up into this larger entity called an Agile release train. And this Agile release train works in generally in 5 sprint like cadence. And what you do is that you have these PI plannings where these teams evaluate together with the business people the objectives that we're going to reach for in this PI.
Program increments.
Yes, program increments. And then they're going to start doing them in their own teams, like sprint by sprint. And what we basically agree on is that what we will get done, what we promise to get done during this PI, for example. So that gives us some sort of predictability what's going to happen in the, say, next 10 weeks or next 20 weeks. So this is like the process mayhem that the Scaled Agile Framework site like gives you, and you can go on there to the site and click all of these things, but this doesn't really tell you anything unless you like know what you're looking for. So what I've done is simplify it a bit.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is the previous slide something that if you're a certificated person, you have to remember that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
So
because I totally remember every part of this by heart. Yes. If you come to wake me up next night at the hotel, ask me anything. I can tell you that.
He knows what, every time you click, he knows what comes up
Yeah.
there and exactly what it says by a comma.
But basically what we're doing here is this. We have a portfolio, and this is where our like business objectives come in. This is where our business people make epics. Okay? The scale is somewhere around, well, at least more than 1 PM, at least more than 10 weeks. Usually somewhere around a few months, perhaps even 6 months. And the idea here is that the epics, the business targets, go through this like rigorous examination. They go through the revision and analysis, and finally, if they get accepted, they get split into features that are then created into these Agile release trains. And these features are then like parts of the epic, which are whole technical like competences or well, features. And these features then go through the same kind of analysis that the business targets went, and they end up as stories on the team level. So that we actually have a structured way of bringing in these business targets and making them to those like granular tasks that teams can actually understand and that teams can actually work on. And how I've done this in Jira is pretty much this. So I've modeled each of these like different layers in SAFe as levels of Jira projects, basically. So we would have our portfolio here. We would have our large solutions here. So large solutions would contain capabilities. And release trains would be over here, containing the features. And then finally the teams would be over here, containing the singular user stories. And this brings us visibility, because now we can actually see in a structured manner how much time is, for example, going into this feature. Okay, there's a certain question here, story points versus like temporal estimation. I prefer temporal estimation in this context because when you do story points, and they're always relative. Now if you have multiple teams side by side doing analysis in story points, they're not really like compatible to each other. Temporal estimates are. But anyway, here we can like see details summed up through the whole hierarchy. How long, for example, does an epic take? What's the like initial estimation of how long this will take? How much work have we actually put into this? So are we over budget? Are we under budget? Are we getting to the goal faster than we wanted? Or perhaps a lot slower? Now, a lot of these points I kind of brought up already. And I'm still saying that SAFe itself, it's not a silver bullet. Definitely not. But it's something that like takes what enterprises are doing these days, bringing a lot more structure into it, bringing a lot more sense into it, and a sensible approach. So you would have this clear structured process for defining these targets and requirements. You would lose these arbitrary priority shifts, because whatever you do is agreed in the PI planning, and work shouldn't come outside from that. You should have no more ambiguous tasks and definitions, because all of those are crunched through first business people and technical people, and then just technical people. So you should end up with like granular, clear tasks. Working in sprints and program increments allows reacting to changes. Well, this is like the idea behind working in iterations. So when you do these like short sprints or short iterations, then you can see, do like a evaluation after the sprint. Is this like target we're going for, is it still valid? Do we need to continue with this? Have we achieved enough with this so that we don't need to continue with this, but we can actually release it already? Plans are based on actual mutual understanding through the PR plannings. So as teams plan together with business, teams can then understand what the business is going after. And when the tasks are defined together, the design is actually based on something the teams themselves can deliver. And smaller batch size equals faster time to market and more frequent releases. So when you're doing all of these things in cadences, in iterations, and paired with DevOps tools, like the DevOps tool chain JP is going to talk about in a second, then you actually enable faster returns because you can release more often. You reduce the cost of holding because you can release faster. And you have a reduced risk of severe failures because what you are deploying, what you are releasing are smaller batches. You're no longer doing this like 500 people have developed this patch for the past 6 months and now we're going to deploy it all and see what happens. So that usually doesn't go very well. How would you avoid creating silos? So this is a natural thing for people to create these sort of their own camps, their own tribes. And in here too, each of these teams is actually an autonomous unit, but the teams here can actually influence on what gets done and how. That's important in like creating cross-team, cross-train like relationships and common goals. As separate teams here can target the same features, which target the same capabilities and target the same epics. So they have common goals. They have a reason to work with each other, to get work done, a reason to relay information to each other, for example.
So you get the same thing like as a startup. Everybody has the same vision, so you get the same thing here.
Right? Yeah. Perhaps on a bit larger scale.
Yeah.
And teams always, like their success is measured together with the other teams because they work towards these common goals. And for example, integration tests are performed on features. And as features are built from user stories delivered by multiple teams, then you can kind of evaluate the success of all teams at once, not just one team. When you have visibility into other teams' tasks, into what the release training is doing, what the portfolio is doing, this creates an understanding of what we're trying to achieve. This creates a sense of purpose for the people who are actually working on it, who are actually building the stuff. I can't tell you how many times I've seen when I've gone into a big enterprise where people at the team level they're just frustrated with it. They're frustrated with what's happening. Even when there comes like a sort of a wind of change when you're trying to, for example, take new methodologies into use, they're always demoralized that this is just another thing that these enterprises do and nothing's going to change, everything's going to be back the way it was in 6 months. And it's going to happen here as well, of course, if people don't do it actually. But at least here we have a way of achieving that. How to support these PI plannings in Jira? Well, I would go it like this. So you would have all your master data in Jira. So skip those Excels, unless you actually need to take an export and show it to some business people. Skip it. It should be there because then it's always up to date. You can always get the up-to-date reports there. You can always get up-to-date measures, graphs, everything. It should be there. You should enable people to create this program board in Jira, which would be like the big target goal that you are building up in a PI, which features get done and what are the dependencies to other features and what is the order of things they're going to be done in. And you can here visualize like the dependencies to each other and visualize the critical path you need to do. So this allows you to adjust and adapt your like strategy for the PI, the order of things, so you can actually get things done the way they should be done. How about empowering teams? So you of course want to empower single teams. You want to make people feel like they matter, like they have a way of actually influencing things. And you should do this by having like a common pipeline, common resources. You should give the teams the ability to use those tools to the best of their abilities and provide them with the guidance they need. You should make sure that the common criteria between these teams is similar, so that you have your definitions of ready, definitions of done. You have similar workflows so that you can actually measure the progress in each team by, for example, using the statuses in their workflows. This basically enables you to combine the data from multiple teams and actually make a progress report based on, for example, reported hours or statuses in the workflow. And the very definition of an information worker is someone who knows more about his work than his boss, right? So you should use this to your advantage and give trust and voice to teams in the PI plannings. Trust that the people who actually do the work know most about it and know most about the technical challenges that are inherent to the problem at hand. And the DevOps itself, I think that Safe in its core is not only DevOps compliant, but it actually in many ways is DevOps, as it aims towards deconstructing these silos. It aims towards cross-functional teams, cross-functional trains. It aims to bring agility to the whole process. And it's highly recommended that a DevOps tool chain should always be employed when doing things this way, because this brings a lot of visibility into what is actually happening. You can identify bottlenecks. For example, if a lot of your tasks are waiting to be tested, you can, for example, understand that perhaps we're missing some testers, or perhaps our priority into testing is not high enough. And at the heart of DevOps is always measure things and act upon them. Well, I kind of went through this, and I think I'm pretty much using my time here, so I'm not going to bore you too much with the details, because we sort of went through them already. But what I want to say here is that in addition to building the configuration in Jira that would support this, you should automate everything, absolutely everything you can. What, for example? Well, for example, the automatic calculation of weighted sorted software first, which is basically a formula that takes account these singular values, how critical something is, how useful, how valuable it is to the business or the users, what's its size, how big of a job is it, and it basically produces a number out of it, and you should use this, at least according to SAFe, to prioritize these things. So you could, for example, automate these. What else? Well, you could, for example, automate bringing up dates. You could, for example, when team does their sprint planning and they assign tasks to sprints, and now you see that your feature consists of these tasks A, B, and C, which are done in sprints 1, 2, and 3. Now you could, for example, automate that. When will this feature be ready? Well, most likely it will be ready after sprint number 3, because the latest part of it that is actually getting done is getting done on sprint 3. What else? Well, obviously, progress measurements. You could do this in, for example, Grafana. Any questions?